evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. What a pleasure it is to see you. And with any luck, the monsoon won't strike, if there is one tonight, until after we've done. I was telling Kent that we did an event Thursday night, and I kept trying to move it along because, you could see the clouds in the whole bit. And everyone was having such a good time. By the time they left, the parking lot was literally up almost to my knees. And, I had to wade across it to go get my car. It's incredible how hard it rains here, isn't it, when it does? So, but it looks like you're going to escape.
Thank you, Lord.
Yay. So we are here to talk about Fox Creek. I have dressed to look like the Great North Woods, or as close as I could come.
In winter.
Well, that's true, right? Because this is a remarkable cat and mouse chase story, which is a lot of fun. And you remember Boundary Waters, which was, all right, so we're going to be fringing along there. Now, a couple of housekeeping things. There is supposed to be a very cool bookmark, and UPS lost it, as they discovered today, so they're overnighting them, and we will have them tomorrow. So if you wish, you can wait till tomorrow to get your book, because I can't produce them, or we'll just give you one when you come back next time.
Can I tell them what the special thing about the bookmark is?
So talk away, yeah.
So I wrote my first 8 or 9 novels longhand, cheap Mead wirebound notebooks. And they asked me if I would go back and pull from the very first, the notebooks that I used in writing Iron Lake.
Wow.
Pull a section from the book that they could then put in my own handwriting on the back of it. So I chose to write about the scene in which Henry Malou first makes his appearance in the series. And, it's just fun.
Well, that's wonderful. And since Henry Malou has a major role in Fox Creek, and I have to say, the advance copy for this book made me extremely nervous. So you all get to read Fox Creek, and you can be nervous too, all the way through. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Thank you.
Yep, indeed. So, which number is this? 18?
19.
19, okay.
But who's counting?
Lightning Strike was 18.
Was 18.
Then. Okay, right. So at this point, good evening. How are you? Gosh, next year is going to be 20. We've really been doing this. I mean,
we've been doing this a lot.
We've done
every year.
Every book.
Except for the pandemic year.
Well, we did that.
We did a virtual.
We did a virtual.
No, I didn't have a book out in 2020.
No, you didn't. But we did
last year.
We did a talk last year here in the store without you because we still couldn't do that. But basically, we have done every book together.
That's right.
It's been wonderful all this time. So if there are 19, and then there are 3 others, right?
Yes.
There's This Tender Land and
Ordinary Grace.
Ordinary Grace, and then the
standalone thriller years and years and years ago called The Devil's Bed. Did anybody here ever read The Devil's Bed?
We sold one the other day.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. You are the only person in the whole universe probably who read The Devil's Bed.
I remember it.
Okay.
No, it was
two people in the entire universe.
It was a political thriller, Actually, probably have more resonance today than it did then.
I get a lot of comments from people who are reading The Devil's Bed, essentially to that effect. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. What prompted you to write it? Do you remember?
The Devil's Bed?
Yeah.
I wrote The Devil's Bed because I'd written 3 books in the Cork OConnor series, and I was kind of corked out. I didn't have another idea for a novel, and I wanted to try something different. I was writing mysteries, and I wanted to write a thriller, which has a different engine at work, and I just wanted to see what that was like. So I wrote The Devil's Bed, and quite enjoyed the process, but realized I really like writing mysteries better. Although, Fox Creek is really very thriller-esque. It
is thriller. So since we've embarked upon that topic, define what you mean by the difference between a mystery and a thriller.
Well, there are complex differences, but if you want a sort of simplified version, at least my take on it, if in a mystery, typically speaking, if the author is playing fair with the readers, the readers and the protagonist are on the same page in terms of what they know about what's going on. So you ought to be helping solve the puzzle along with the protagonist. And what fuels a mystery is the question at the heart of it. Usually that's who done it, or sometimes it's why done it. But that's a mystery. A thriller is a different kind of an animal. In a thriller, very often, in fact, typically, as the reader, you'll understand what's going on ahead of the protagonist. You know more about what's going on than the protagonist does. And the question in a thriller is not whether, who done it or why done it. It's, will the protagonist, the people you really care about, understand what's going on in time to prevent it? And what drives a thriller purely and simply is the suspense. So that's my down and dirty take on it.
I mean, a thriller is about who wins.
And the stakes are always very high in a thriller, not necessarily so much in a mystery.
Right. And a mystery tends to unspool linearly, although oftentimes you have to have flashbacks because the crime results from events in the past. But, so sometimes it goes back and forth, and sometimes the detective just unearths whatever, might have happened. Whereas a thriller can start at zero, essentially,
Yep.
and go forward. So, in fact, Fox Creek is a thriller.
Yeah.
It really is. So set it up for us, because it's an interesting opening.
Sure. A woman who's a stranger, her name is Dolores Morisseau, seeks out Henry Malou on Crow Point, and Henry Malou's niece, Rainey Bissonette, who is Cork's wife, she comes looking for their help. Although she doesn't realize it, she's being pursued by a group of ruthless mercenaries who believe that she has information that powerful people will pay a lot of money for. In order to evade these ruthless mercenaries, Henry Malou has to lead these two women into the boundary waters and use all of his wiles to try to stay a step ahead of his pursuers. Now, when Cork understands what's going on, of course, he leaps in pursuit, but night descends and a freak snowstorm occurs, which prevents Cork from really being able to do what he would like to do. And in Cork's long night of his soul, his greatest fear is that he's not going to be able to save the people he loves the most. But really the question at the heart of the whole story is this going to be Henry Malou's last trip into this wilderness he's called home for over 100 years?
I'm not telling you, but I finished it. But actually, interestingly enough, in chapter 1, which is where I thought you were going to start, Cork is like flipping hamburgers, right? On his grill and the whole bit. And a man shows up and...
Yeah, a guy shows up asking Cork to use his abilities as a private investigator to find this man's wife. And Cork very quickly learns that the man is not who he says he is, and things go from there. I got to tell you, I wrote that opening scene not knowing what the hell was going to happen the rest of the book. I was just, looking for a place that might be kind of fun to open the story, and I came up with this scene, and then I had to figure out, okay, what the hell is this guy doing, and why is he lying to Cork, and who is he really, and all of those things.
Yeah, no, I like it, but I mean, it's fun to see Cork, set up. He doesn't have any reason to assume that the guy isn't
That's right.
a legitimate client, telling the truth, because in addition, excuse me, to flipping burgers, he actually is a private investigator, right?
Yeah, I got to say this. Let me tell you, my approach to writing this book was very different from writing most of the other Cork O'Connor novels that I have.
It has to have been.
Yeah. So, okay, so a mystery. Here's sort of mystery writing 101. A mystery is, I think, one of the most tightly woven fabrics of storytelling that there is, because everything depends so significantly on everything else. And I think that the success of a mystery depends largely on the timing of the reveals. When you give the reader the clues that are going to help the reader solve the mystery at the heart of the story. And so when I write typically when I write a Cork O'Connor novel, I think that story through as completely as I can before I ever put my fingers to the keyboard. At the end of that thinking process, I know how the story begins, I know how it ends, I know who did what to whom and why, I know the themes I want to weave through the story. But with Fox Creek, I didn't. I had no idea where I was going to go with this. I just knew somehow I had to deal. So those of you who remember, how many of you read Desolation Mountain? Okay. Desolation Mountain was the last contemporary setting for a Cork O'Connor novel that I did. Last year was Lightning Strike. It was a prequel. The year before that, I had no book out. The year before that was This Tender Land. And the year before that was Desolation Mountain, the last of the contemporary stories. At the end of Desolation Mountain, I left Henry in a really precarious situation because that story ends with Stephen and Henry both sharing a vision of Henry's death. And so I didn't know what the hell to do with that. So I had like three intervening years to come up with something. And so I knew that that's what I had to deal with in Fox Creek. That was my major problem in Fox Creek, how to deal with this vision of death that Stephen and Henry Malou had had. That was a tough one.
It was a tough one. And just because Henry is 100, maybe, doesn't mean...
105.
We don't...
Maybe.
Henry doesn't even know how old Henry is. But I would just like to say, you know, as a person zipping around, you know, all the rest of it in my 80s, I don't think it's unreasonable for Henry at 100 to...
Thank you very much.
You know, I'm planning on being a centenarian, so I was kind of miffed, you know, and reading some of the comments about, you know, poor Henry, he's so old, you know, it's just all over. And I'm going, no, it's not. There are plenty of people out there who are centenarians. Actually, there's a huge number of centenarians.
More and more all the time.
Yeah. So, you know, what was it? I think the last century was 115, I think. They're always mentioning like the oldest person that they know when they, you know, fall over, so to speak. And I think it was 115. So Henry's good. Henry's got, you know, got years to go. Maybe, or maybe not. But you're right. The vision is the issue that you have to deal with. And of course, you know, Henry is not as much on his game as he once was. So he's slower. And he has to take off into the Great North Woods, hoping to conceal himself and the Rainey and Dolores from whoever's after them. There's this great character in this book because you have to have an antagonist to make a thriller work. And it's okay to say it's just like a group of mercenaries, but that's really boring. There is a guy called the Wolf, le Loup, French for wolf. And he is really interesting, and you may not have thought about this, but I found that Malou in this book, there are lots of similarities to this Tender Land.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't see that at all.
But I do. I mean, I've known you so long, I actually know how your mind works.
Oh, that's really interesting.
But think about it.
That's a little scary.
Think about it, really. Don't you think that in part that's what's going on?
Tell me about this, Barbara.
It's a coming-of-age story for an older person.
Oh.
It's a voyage of self-discovery.
A voyage of self-discovery.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
He sent me the manuscript of This Tender Land and asked me how I thought it would go because it was supposed to be a sequel to Ordinary Grace, the contract that he had. Remember what I wrote back? You don't remember what I wrote back. I remember what I wrote.
All I remember is that what you wrote back to me was so incredibly encouraging.
You also used it. No, basically what I said was that Ordinary Grace really couldn't have a sequel, but This Tender Land was, you know, and you shouldn't try to sell it that way. Then, you know. Anyway, I found a remarkable parallel between this book and This Tender Land. That's very interesting.
I didn't even see that.
Just your subconscious.
Well, you know, the truth is, if you're a storyteller, you're being influenced by all kinds of things, so many of them subconscious. When This Tender Land came out, for example, and I was asked about the influences, the literary influences, you know, I cited Homer, and I cited Mark Twain, and I cited Dickens, and people would say, what about Frank L. Baum? What about The Wizard of Oz? And I'm going, oh my God, you're right. There's the Wicked Witch and the tornado and the four characters in search of things they didn't have. But I didn't see that at all while I was writing this story until afterward, you know?
I love it. There's just, you know, there are iconic stories out there. Actually, what really interests you, I think, is the development of women, but more so maybe the journey that men take to become who they ought to be.
Yeah, that's a theme that I use often in my stories.
And it's certainly been a theme, not just for Cork, but for his children, for other people in the Cork O'Connor books was certainly a theme in Ordinary Grace and definitely a theme in This Tender Land.
Absolutely.
So maybe your political thriller is the only one. Maybe that's why it didn't work. Your heart wasn't in it. It did work, actually. It's a very good book.
It is. It's a different kind of political thriller. It was the kind of political thriller
Right.
William Kent Krueger would write. Wow, I see a lot of the things. Wow, now I see a lot of the things that you're saying are true.
I have to tell you about Thomas Perry. I once asked Thomas Perry, because he had a book coming out on Tuesday, why he didn't go somewhere. We couldn't do our event till Thursday. And I said to him, why don't you just go somewhere else and then you can come here on Thursday. I mean, Thomas Perry's won the Edgar. I mean, he's an amazing author, right?
He's
The Butcher,
great.
the whole bit. I said, so why are you waiting till Thursday? And he said, I don't go on tour until I come to the store because I don't know what to talk about until you tell me what. It's really true. He starts all his book tours here. It's just so funny.
Well, so many of us start our book tours here.
You do. I know.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, it's just, I think, having known you from the beginning when you and I were a lot younger, and watched how
But still as good looking.
Watched how you have evolved as a novelist, because you don't always know for sure when you meet a novelist for the first time how it's going to go. I mean, you can kind of guess, you can look at their command of language, you can tell what themes they might be exploring. It isn't just some kind of rote story or an elaborate puzzle or something, but sometimes also people get derailed. Life intervenes, illness can happen, success can actually come too soon and ruin a lot of people. It's a lot easier, I think, as a novelist, not easier, more formative to withstand failure than too easy an enormous success at the outset. Then I think it creates anxiety too about, can you ever live up to it if you've had I mean, it took Thomas Harris, forever after Silence of the Lambs? It was like 10 years. Margaret Mitchell never wrote another book.
Harper Lee should never have written another book.
Well, she didn't intend that to
I
be
know.
published, so we can't. I mean, I've seen that happen, that, success is such a pinnacle for some writers feel like they just can't ever go back to it.
I came into the business in a time when publishers were still willing to nurture you.
That's right.
So although Iron Lake did really, really well, it wasn't a phenomenal hit, but with each
you won
book,
the Anthony Award for it. It got a lot of, but if you're looking just at raw sales
just
data,
in
it probably
terms of raw
wasn't that
sales,
huge,
exactly. But with every book, I gained a larger audience, and slowly it built, and my publisher was willing to allow me to do that all the way along until finally, well, here we are today.
And he has the same publisher, which is really unusual. It's not that often anymore that an author can have this many books and this long a career with one publisher.
Yes, if the folks out there at
Yay,
Atria
Atria.
Books and Simon & Schuster are watching,
Yeah.
I love you.
Me too. No, seriously, I think that, and that continuity, I think, helps a lot in developing you as a writer and also a career.
Well, what happens is you establish a trust in one another. I trust that they're going to handle me well. They're going to give me a wonderfully looking book.
Yeah, it's a great cover. Isn't it?
Yeah.
I really like the
And
cover.
and they trust that I will give them a story worth investing in time and time again. So, it works.
So there are various viewpoints in this book. Tell us who the various narrators are, because this is not a story that only Cork can tell you.
Yeah, so you see the story from actually 4 different viewpoints. You see it from Cork's viewpoint, of course. You see it from his wife Rainie's viewpoint. You see it from his son Stephen's viewpoint, and you see it from the viewpoint of the wolf.
The wolf.
And each of them contributes a different perspective to what's happening in the story. And this is the first book I've ever written using present tense.
Yep.
Which was something I wanted to experiment with. But the other reason I did it is that's how the story came to me. It came to me in present tense. And it just seemed like such a better way to create suspense and build suspense and the immediacy of that present tense.
If you're going to have a really thrilling chase, it has to be in the present tense.
Oh,
You
absolutely,
can't
absolutely.
go, and then they went, and he's,
Right.
no, forget it. No, I think it does need to be in the present tense, but I do like the fact that the multiple by the way, do not read, I've already said this, do not read the author note or the acknowledgement in the back of this book until you're done. if you're one of those people who likes to look all that up first, don't do it. You will spoil this book. You really will. So even I, who normally does, for some reason didn't. And I was very grateful that I had not done
Good.
that. Right. So tell us about Boundary Waters, and you've done a couple of others where, people were out there in the wilderness and they're kayaking along, or terrible things can happen with the weather and all the rest of it. But this one is more about Henry's craft, his ability to move but conceal. So how much do you know about that? How much did you, do you have like some tracker consultant, or did you just imagine it, or how'd you do that?
It's in the genes.
Listen, you're a guy who writes in a coffee shop, I just don't see it.
No, I actually ordered a bunch of books on how to track.
Did you?
And how not to be tracked.
Okay.
So I could understand both sides of that issue. And I found that really compelling, really engaging. And then I had to distill all of that information down to some of the basics, because I didn't want to overwhelm the reader. But I just had Henry essentially follow the dictates of all of the things that I had read about how not to be tracked. And then for the tracker's side, I followed all the dictates of how you would try to track somebody. And so I could create this cat and mouse game between the wolf and Henry Malou. Two people on opposite sides of the issue, but with really the same kind of spirit at work.
So will old and cunning prevail over young, and I love it. But to do that, it requires a very definite landscape. You do, for example, when Henry leads them onto the rock, so
so they can't be followed.
And
no
he's
tracks.
constantly saying, watch your feet, don't bend, don't stumble, don't bend anything,
don't disturb the lichen, don't
right.
Yeah. Don't step through, step over, don't, all of these.
So you really had to either know or imagine the terrain of where Henry is going.
Yeah, I do a great job of imagining that, because I just imagine places that I've been in the Boundary Waters, and I typically will use those places. And one of the reasons that I'm a storyteller, and those of us who are storytellers is that for whatever reason we possess the ability to sink ourselves deeply into the imagining of a thing and create it in such a way that it feels real to the reader. So in Fox Creek, the reader probably feels like the author knows a whole lot more about all of these things he's writing about than really he does.
Don't spoil it. Come on. Remember the Great Oz? He hid
behind the curtain.
Yeah, don't do that. Right. I think you did an amazing job. But you were wonderful when you wrote Boundary Waters. Most of your books have very evocative landscapes that, whether you know them well or whether you've just imagined them, are convincing.
Well, I write profoundly out of a sense of place, and profoundly out of a love of Minnesota. And so when I'm writing the Cork O'Connor novels and I'm talking about the Great North Woods, I'm not native to Minnesota, folks. I didn't move there until I was about 30 years old, so that my wife Diane could go to the University of Minnesota Law School. And I was a gypsy kid before that. Never really had anywhere I called home, but the minute I set foot in Minnesota, I knew I'd found home. I fell in love with that place. And so when I set out to write, I wanted to essentially write a Valentine to this adopted home of mine. And so whether I'm writing about the North Country in the Cork novels, or whether I'm writing about that beautiful agrarian southern Minnesota, the great Midwest, I'm giving them the readers a piece of my heart. And I think it comes through to the readers. I think that's something that they pick up on.
Well, look at the titles for your books: Iron Lake, Boundary Waters, Purgatory Ridge, Tamarack County, Vermilion Drift.
Or This Tender Land.
Red Knife, which I've always thought was interesting. That's the one that takes place on the reservation. Desolation Mountain, Manitou Canyon, Wendigo Island. All of the titles are evocative of whatever landscape.
Two-word place names, all of them.
Some
of the places are real, some I have created.
Was Purgatory Ridge the one that takes place on the lake with the boat?
Yep.
It was.
Lake Superior.
That's a really terrific book. I mean, I still remember that. Remember Nevada Bar,
A Superior Death.
Superior Death also
Yeah.
takes advantage of Lake Superior and its unique
You know, when you live,
geographical quality.
when you have a natural phenomenon like Lake Superior, my God, why would you not use it?
Well, Steve Hamilton uses it too, but from the other
to
side
great
of the
effect,
lake.
yeah.
Yeah, he's over in Michigan, and my kids were just up at Mackinac Island, and they sent me a whole bunch of photos. I'm sorry I can't show them, of the hotel. And you know, the big deal. I was there years and years and years ago on my second honeymoon, and everybody, you know, rode tandem bicycles. But now they've done the Central Park thing, and my son-in-law said to me, amazing, he said, they just handed over a horse and carriage. And, you know, and I thought, am I supposed to, you know, am I supposed to drive this? I mean, there's no instruction. There's the, so he sent a photo, and here's Jim looking nervous, you know. And, but you know, Mackinac is, it geographically is such an interesting place, right at the top there of Lake Michigan, but the way, isn't it where all three, the Superior, Huron, and Michigan all come together, right?
Oh, that sounds about right.
I think that's right. Right. Isn't that where Sault Ste. Marie is? Right. Yeah.
Sault Ste. Marie is
right
close,
above. Yeah. Right.
Just a ways away.
Yeah. So we signed up. I grew up in Chicago on Lake Michigan. And next year, in September, my husband and I signed up to do a cruise of the Great Lakes. We have cruised all over the world, but not the Great Lakes. And Viking, which is, you know, there's I can't remember the name of whatever act it is, but forever, only American-owned ships and crew could sail on American waters. But they reformed the act, whatever it was, and now Viking, which is a Norwegian company, can actually do the Mississippi and the Great Lakes. So we start in Milwaukee and we end up in Toronto, but we go all the way around, going to go back to Mackinac.
Fun, yeah.
But, you know, I thought to myself, you know, we chase like oceans and waters all over the world. Why not the Great Lakes?
So you're telling me we're going to have Viking ships coming up to St. Paul?
We're going to have
down to
Viking. Actually, it goes to Duluth, which I've never been to Duluth. Karen, you know, many of you know Karen who works here. Karen actually is from Duluth. And Brian Freeman, who's a lovely author, is from Duluth.
That's right.
So it's way up there, right? Particularly cold in Duluth.
It's a beautiful city. The lake actually ameliorates the
oh, does it?
Right, so it's not quite as cold in the winter, and it's not quite as hot in the summer.
Uh-huh. So how come you haven't written about Duluth?
Because that's Brian Freeman's territory.
Oh.
We don't step on each other's toes.
Okay. I see, but Lucas is fair game. Lucas and Virgil, I love it. Right. Right. So what else can we talk about without, I mean, unfortunately, this is a book, if we say very much, we're going to ruin it.
Could I read just a little bit?
Absolutely.
Let me read the prologue to you, because this is Henry Malou's story. This is all about Henry Malou. And so I wanted to bring the reader into the book with Henry. So this is how I bring the reader into Fox Creek. He's an old man with more than a century of living behind him. When he rises each morning, there is no part of his body that doesn't feel the weight, the ache, the wear of all those years. Although he moves more slowly now, he still unceasingly walks the forests with which he has been in intimate communion since he was a boy, spends full days alone in the great North Woods. His disappearances have become a cause for concern among those who care about him, and there are many, not only on the Iron Lake Reservation, but also in the town of Aurora and across much of Tamarack County, Minnesota. When he returns from a long absence and sees the worry on their faces, he smiles and asks, "What are you afraid of?" Their answers are vague fears for his safety. "If I lie down somewhere on a soft bed of pine needles and begin my journey into the next world without a chance for you to say goodbye, you can always burn tobacco and send me your prayers. I will hear," he promises. His body is a thin wall between this world and that which awaits him beyond, but sometimes his spirit travels between these two worlds. He has occasionally flown like an eagle, and seen from a high place his own body lying as if lifeless under a canopy of pine boughs. He understands his death as an experience neither to fear nor to welcome. It is simply a place toward which he has been walking since the moment of his birth. The world around him is one that has both showered him in delight and presented him with enormous challenge. The delight has always been in nature, in the beauty it has offered, the solace, the lessons, the wisdom, the healing, the communion of spirits. The challenge has been of the human kind. At the hands of human beings he has experienced cruelty, pain, deceit, avarice, jealousy, hate. Most of his life he has been a healer, working in the ways of the natural world to help guide others to a place of harmony. It is the purpose to which he was born. But he feels the pull of another calling now, one that despite his age and knowledge and wisdom, he doesn't understand. It is a dark calling, melancholy and unsettling. As he walks the woods in the communion of spirits, he asks for answers which have not come. Patience has always been his grounding, but he feels himself growing restless and uncertain. He feels he is being followed, but not by anything human. Death is his shadow. The prospect of his own death isn't what troubles him. It is the sense that death will come to others, come far too early in their journey through this world. What the old man, this ancient soul, is trying to understand is this: am I the one who stands between death and the others, or am I the one who leads death to them? Isn't that a great beginning?
Very powerful. And you set up actually the,
Yeah.
the stakes of the book, which we said were high. I did think of one other thing to talk about. Minnesota is a boundary state, as you know, between the U.S. and Canada, and many of the people in the books have French names. So, the French and the British, as you know, fought very hard for dominion in North America. And so it's the fact that people like Henry and people like Malou, otherwise known as the Wolf, have French names. Is that a hangover from way back, in the 17th century?
Oh, absolutely it is. We have the Voyageurs, a huge influence in the North Country. And so, you'll find a lot of Native Americans who have French names of French origin. Not uncommon at all.
So that's why, you have fun with that. So I am giving away tonight to whatever lucky person whose number we draw this amazing book called Life on the Mississippi, which if you've read This Tender Land, you will well understand. But the amount of history that Rinker Buck, the guy's name is, Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, contributes in the opening about, in fact, the importance of the river system and the voyageurs and how America would never have been able to become both migratory to the west and the trade powerhouse that it was if it hadn't gone through the Cumberland Gap and into the Ohio Valley and down the Mississippi and come down, from the north. It really is the great rivers in the central United States that pulled people west and changed what kind of country we were going to be, not just an eastern seaboard country.
When will this book be available to readers?
It's out in September, I think.
Just around the corner, really.
Yeah, this is my advanced reading copy. Anyway, there's remarkable history in it. You would love this book. I'm sorry I promised to give it away, or I'd give it to you, but too bad.
Barbara, I can afford to buy that book now.
Right, but I'm an historian by training, and even I was really surprised at some of the things that he had to say about our early history and how it developed. But I couldn't help but think of This Tender Land because, again, the Mississippi is an artery that, pulls them through life. And here it is.
Every day I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the Mississippi River divides St. Paul and Minneapolis. And not a day goes by that I understand how blessed I am to live on one of the great rivers of the world. It's a beautiful thing flowing through the Twin Cities before it gets all polluted down south.
It starts out in Hackensack, Minnesota, where I have been and stepped over it. My sister went to camp there, and that was one of the big attractions, is that you could hop over the source of the Mississippi. I don't know if it's precisely in Hackensack, but Hackensack is
Lake
close
Itasca. It's
enough.
at a
right?
place called Lake Itasca.
Right. Actually, we just drove through Colorado, and I forgot that the Rio Grande, actually, the headwaters are in Colorado, in the mountains
I swam
south of
across.
Gunnison.
I swam across the Rio Grande there, just outside Del Norte,
Aha.
Colorado, when I was much younger, and it was very cold.
I'm sure it was very cold. They were having the same monsoons that we've been having, and the volume of water was extraordinary up there. But in Albuquerque, for the first time, the river was dry. Just, there are photographs of it.
Yeah.
And so, we're in a ridiculous drought. And I don't know. I mean, every time I look at a new apartment building going up or whatever, I think, what is it they intend to do for water?
You're not getting Minnesota's water, folks.
No.
Not going there.
My solution is that California needs to desalinate, and if it gets to the point where there's not enough water and it's so expensive to try to deal with it, that they're the only one of the Colorado River Compact that can actually do that. We can't easily do it, but it'll be kind of interesting to see. Do you all know that there was a law passed in Arizona now in effect that your HOA or whatever organization might control what you plant cannot now prevent you from putting in artificial turf? We had this running war for like 8 years with our HOA because we wanted to do our backyard already was in tiger turf, but we wanted to do the front too, because it was ridiculous to be spending all this water and the whole bit.
Yeah.
So we did it. And I don't know if other people are aware that if that's an obstacle for you, that you can now do that. Under a state law that says, that anybody who wants to swap out, and I'm sure they're actually going to probably start offering, or, some kind of rebate or something if you do that in order to save on water.
Yeah.
So, but that's not going to be a problem in Minnesota.
Well,
Probably not.
Probably not. I mean, even us, we are growing drier. We don't have the snows that we used to have.
Right.
The moose are heading farther north because it's too warm for them now in Minnesota.
And they're going to meet the grizzlies coming south, right? That'll be exciting. Right. So, questions. Anybody have a question they'd like to ask him? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Somebody asked earlier about what you're working on now. First of all, when I saw you here the last time, I had only read Ordinary Grace and 2 random
Cork O'Connor's?
books. And so then I went, okay, I've got to read them all in order so I can read Lightning Strike. And so I have read all of them, including The Devil's Bandit.
Wonderful, wonderful.
But just curious, tell us a little bit more about your new, the kind of the standalone. I mean, I know you're not going to break any big secrets, but
No, the standalone is called The River We Remember. I love that title, The River We Remember. And like Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, it's set in southern Minnesota rather than the northern Minnesota of the Cork O'Connor novels. And like those 2 books, it takes place in an earlier time. This takes place in 1958. In Ordinary Grace, I dealt sort of peripherally with the issue of what the World War II did to the men who were my father's age. My father came back wounded in many ways from the war, and I wanted to, I talked a little bit about that in Ordinary Grace, but I wanted to go into it more deeply. And although The River We Remember is really a solid mystery, it's a solid whodunit, it is at heart really about what war did to those men, did to the men who came back. The boys went away to World War II or to the Korean conflict, boys. And they came back men wounded in so many ways. And the people that they left behind were fighting their own kinds of wars. And so I wanted to talk about war and what it does to the soul and how it wounds and how do we heal from those wounds. And that's what The River We Remember is about. But it's a darn good mystery too.
Is that next summer's book?
It'll be out next fall. I'm not sure when.
So not a Cork O'Connor then in 20.
Not a Cork O'Connor in 2023. The next Cork O'Connor, which I am just beginning to embark on now,
The
will come
20th.
out in 2024. It'll be number 20. It'll be out in
Yay.
2024.
Sounds great. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned, okay, 20 of the Cork O'Connor. Do you have ideas for books in your head? I mean, 3 or 4 ahead, or, oh gee, I want to explore this, or do they just sort of come to you out of the blue?
Yes. Sometimes I have a sense of what the next Cork O'Connor novel has to be. For example, Fox Creek. I knew whatever I wrote had to address the issue that I had left up in the air in Desolation Mountain. I know what the next Cork O'Connor novel is going to be because of my friends in the Ojibwe community who have made me aware of a significant issue in the Native community these days, and I wanted that to be at the heart of the next book. So I know what that book is going to be about. I have one more Cork O'Connor under contract after that, and I have no idea what that book's going to be about. But I do know what my next standalone will be, and I'm chomping at the bit to get started on that one. I'm so excited about the future. Yeah. Okay.
Point when they were going south, and suddenly they were in St. Paul or something, and I went, how did this happen? And I realized that my geography, which way the river.
Yeah. It's an odd river in that it begins flowing east.
Right.
It begins and it flows south first, then it flows east, and at Mankato it turns north, where it meets the Mississippi River at St. Paul. Yeah. Well, there you go. You learn something new every day. Yeah, he's a fascinating character. And Henry Malou, apparently. So Henry, every storyteller knows that there are blessings that come to you and you have no idea of the source, where they come from. They just drop into your lap out of heaven. And that was Henry Malou. When I was writing Iron Lake, I'm writing right at the very beginning a scene in which Cork, this is just a few pages into the story, Cork drives into a snowstorm and he encounters a man walking along the road and he invites the man in, and it turns out to be Henry Malou. And I'm going, well, this guy's interesting. I had no idea what I was going to do with Henry Malou. I had no idea the central part he was going to play in the rest of this series. And where he came from, I really can't tell you. The one thing I know about Henry is that he's the favorite character of many readers, and he's my favorite character to write, because when I write a scene in which Henry Malou plays a part, I almost never have to rewrite that scene. As I write it, it plays out exactly the way it's supposed to, and Henry says exactly the things he's supposed to. And if you ask me where that comes from, God only knows. It's just a blessing, and I don't want to probe it too deeply because I don't want to monkey with the magic, you know. But you know, Henry, his spirituality really rises largely out of the spirituality of the culture that he's a part of. Most indigenous people, their spirituality rises significantly out of their understanding of the relationship that they have with the spirit of the land itself, and how all of this and we are connected. And so if you write about Henry Malou, or you write about any of the spiritual aspects of an indigenous people, that's going to be right there front and center.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
You touched on something as a that I think is fascinating, because you have this Cork O'Connor that you just wrote, the 19th. You're real excited about the standalone. You already know that you have 2 more Cork O'Connors, one of which you know what you're going to do. you have another standalone. How do you keep all those stories straight from one? But the continuity of the characters is always fascinating. I love, like this lady, once we discovered you, we went right back to the beginning and came all the way through. And following his family and watching them grow up and evolve. I don't know how you keep all those things straight.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do either. You know, I have friends who keep dossiers on every character they create. So they can always go back to their dossiers and figure out where the character came from and all the specifics about their character. And I'm thinking, boy, wouldn't that have been a good idea? I very often have to go back and reread what I've written before to make sure I've got things correct. And every once in a great while, I screw up. And readers will let me know that I've screwed up. For example, Cork's grandson, Wabu, is part Ojibwe and part white. And I had forgotten that. And in one of the books, he's all Ojibwe. And a reader wrote to me and said, no, wait a minute. I'm going, oh, you're right. Oh, man. So I screw up. And so I don't keep it all together. On the other hand, I know these people so well. I've been living with them for 30 years now. So it's easy for me to keep track of who they are at heart, which is the most important thing.
Patrick, do you have a couple questions from viewers?
Yeah, I do. Is that the camera making weird sounds?
Something was, I
auditory
wasn't sure.
hallucinations here.
Somebody's electronics were beeping over there.
Okay. Yes, a couple of people had questions from the online audience, and one of them is, are there any topics that are kind of off limits to you? Have you ever started to write something and said, nah, I don't think I want to go there?
Are there any topics that are off limits,
I got the
was the
mic, so we
question for Kent.
Yeah, I thought there was. And then I realized that there aren't. And here's what I thought. I decided early on that the one place I would never go was doing harm to a child. I would never want to write a scene in which a child is harmed. I'm a grandparent. I'm a parent. I don't like reading that. Why would I want to write it? And then I wrote a book called Copper River. And I opened Copper River with the death of an adolescent. And it was the hardest thing I have ever written. But it was important to the story. And so I had to write that scene as delicately as I could. And I have to tell you, honestly, it's one of the best openings I've ever written because I had to be so careful in how I handled it. So I guess there is no place I won't go if the story demands that I go there.
And the other?
The other question was just about your own reading tastes. I'm assuming that you read pretty broadly and widely.
The assumption is that I read pretty broadly and widely.
Which are the same.
Yes, I do.
Anything that might surprise people? Any guilty pleasures?
I honestly don't read as broadly as I would like to read. If I'm not reading fiction, the nonfiction typically that I read is for the research that I'm doing. A book like this absolutely sounds fascinating.
It really is.
Will I get around to reading it? I'm not sure if I have the time to do that because I'm doing my research. I'm also, most of the reading, and this, well, it's probably not true for you, but it's true for a lot of authors. The vast majority of the reading I do are of ARCs, or bound galleys, advanced reading copies or bound galleys of books that you won't see on the bookshelves for many, many months. And I've been asked to read them in order to offer a dust jacket quote, what we call a blurb. You've seen that thing across the cover that says, Stephen King says, this is the best book since the Bible. When I broke into the business, established authors were kind enough to give me dust jacket quotes, and it's a way that we pay back. So I do an enormous amount of reading of dust jacket quotes to help these authors as they try to establish their own careers. And the other thing is that I have led a book group for my church for like 25 years now, so I'm always reading the book so I can lead the discussion of the book group, which leaves me very little time to actually choose the books that I would like to read.
Story of my life too. I mean,
Yeah,
there are
I'm
some
sure it
days
is.
I do three 3 events in one day. And in order to do it, I have to have read the
I am
book.
amazed that you actually were able to read, and you have always read whatever book we discuss. And I'm so grateful because not everybody at a book event that I do has done that, Barbara.
Years ago, did I ever tell you my Dave Barry story?
No.
I told you all. I'm getting to the point where I repeat things. Well, okay. So years and years ago, Dave Barry wrote a thriller, and the premise was about a guy in Florida who it's come true. But anyway, the guy in Florida made his living by voting. He got paid to go vote, and it was a very funny book. It was a Dave Barry book, and anyway, his publisher decided they would send him here to kick it off. And at that time, before all of these electronics, we did a program for the Scottsdale Library, and they had a little video studio. And I did a ton of YouTube things for them. I mean, Robert Parker, people that you wouldn't normally see. So the library wants to do Dave Barry, right? So I got up at 5 in the morning to watch Dave Barry on the Today Show in order to scare myself to death so that I could talk to Dave Barry at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And anyway, so I'd never met Dave, and we gather at the TV studio, and I said to him, "So Dave," I said, "I got up at 5 o'clock this morning to watch you on the Today Show and scare myself to death." And he looked at me and he said, "That was all about them." He said, "They don't read books. This is going to be all about me, right?" Which in fact it was, because I was able to talk to him about how the guy, made a living in a tree and voting. But whatever. But I mean, that was in its way a really profound statement, because all the radio interviewers and the TV shows, when Daniel Silva shows up on the Today Show, they haven't read his book. They don't have time, and they're not necessarily readers anyway. But you can't have an in-depth conversation with an author if you haven't read the book. And I'll tell you, this was actually what came up the other night when the camera was on. Last year, David Baldacci wanted to do an event with Jake Tapper, the CNN, correspondent and all. And I thought it was great. And fortunately, I read Jake Tapper's book, which I liked. Set in the 1950s, and it's got a lot of the Rat Pack and all kinds of other things, and a key player whom I will get to. So everything's fine, but I kind of breezed through the book because Dave's going to do the heavy lifting, right? He doesn't need me to be part of this conversation. Except that when we went to connect, Dave was in a thunderstorm somewhere in the middle of Virginia, and guess what? He couldn't connect. And I suddenly realized at 1:07 that I was going to be talking to Jake Tapper all by myself about this book. I was saved. I said this the other night. I was saved by the fact that Ann Margaret and I went to high school together, and the worst fight I ever had with my mother was that we had to wear formal dresses to do we sang together, to do some concerts, and her family was so poor she didn't have any, and I loaned her one of mine. And my mother, who had a thing about not loaning clothes, nearly killed me for doing that. So it's seared in my memory. So I was able to bluff my way along with Jake. And I mean, really, it was a fascinating book. But the lesson there was you can't ever go into one of these unprepared, because you really don't know if it's suddenly going to be all you. Just there you are, right? So anyway, but I enjoy it. Yeah, luckily, as you know, it only takes me an hour or so to read a book, so it's really annoying, but that's how it is. Until I had a bookstore, I never had enough books to read, and now I have. Now I'm really serious, and and now of course I can't. I got on average 150 to 200 advanced reading copies a month, and I probably read 2/3 of it, and some not necessarily cover to cover, because sometimes here's a lesson for you too. If the book isn't working for you, don't finish it. I mean, life is too short to read bad books. It just is. And, so you do learn a certain amount of triage if that's your life.
Oh, yeah.
To go through there. Patrick is the same, you have tons to read, and sometimes they're just not your book, right?
Yep, definitely.
Is there another final question before we move to?
Beryl would like to know, how do you know so much about the Ojibwe culture?
Okay.
That's a great question.
I probably seem to know a lot about the culture of the Anishinaabe to white people. But I also do a pretty good job, according to most of my Native American friends. And here's how it happened. When I decided to include the Ojibwe as an element of my Cork OConnor stories, at that point I knew about what every white person knows about the indigenous people we live shoulder to shoulder with, which was nothing. But I was a cultural anthropology major the little time I was in college. And so the idea of learning about this culture, not my own, was pretty exciting. And I began, in the way all good academics begin, I began by reading. But in the course of my research, I began to meet members of the Ojibwe community and form relationships that have become important friendships to me over the years. I rely on my Ojibwe friends for so many things. Often they give me an idea for an issue that I build a story around. Whenever I have time, whenever my deadlines will allow, I will have one of my Ojibwe friends, at least, but usually two, read my manuscript and vet it so that I haven't said anything that's stupid or even worse, offensive. So I am painfully aware that I'm a white guy trespassing on a culture not my own. So I work very hard to get it right. And the response from the readers who bothered, the Ojibwe readers, the native readers who've bothered to contact me has been, without exception, positive. So I like to relate this. I got an email a while back that went something like this. Dear Mr. Krueger, I am the tribal librarian on the Lance Reservation, which is on the UP of Michigan. She said, when any of our members come in and they're not sure what they want to read, I will often recommend your books, because for a white guy, you do a pretty good job.
That's really very nice. It's becoming more and more problematic to write about a culture.
It is, indeed it is.
Not your own. And publishers have taken to hiring, quote, sensitivity readers who go through manuscripts and give feedback about, and I can't even tell you how opposed I am to that whole idea. I mean, it's wonderful the way you're doing it, but I would be, if I were an author, outraged if somebody sent my book to a sensitivity reader and I was forced to make changes that I didn't agree with, but this is kind of
it's a complex issue with no easy answer.
It's a very complex issue, but that's my position anyway. But you've handled it really well all these years. I think Red Knife is the only one where you were on the reservation almost the whole time.
That could have been because that was inspired by a true event that occurred in Minnesota on the reservation.
But I think that's the one I felt was the most interesting to navigate for you.
That was a hard book to write.
It was a hard book to write. Well, thank you all very much for coming this evening. Larry, are you up there? How many numbers did you give out? Sorry? 17, is that what he said? 7. All right. I need you to pick a number between 1 and 7.
6.
Whoa.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry, I meant 1. You shouldn't have told me. No, it was 6. 6 was what came out of my mouth.
All right. Is there a 6 here? You have to look in your book to see if you have a number.
That's me. I got another book a couple days ago.
Are you number 6? So we can give it to number 1? All right.
There you go. It's your lucky day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very generous.
And I'm going to give you back your very own copy of Fox Creek. So many thanks for coming out this evening, Kent. As always, a terrific pleasure. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.